We'd love, we'd love to see you if this is your chance to turn off your camera if you're not comfortable with having your image recorded. So our theme for Wells Fall Weekend this year is connecting our community. I'm Chris Solander Gordon. I'm class of 1980, and I'm the VP for Fall Weekend for WCA. And in fitting with our theme, we have a terrific representation today of the Wells community. And we have a number of folks from the Board of Trustees, the WCA board, President Gibraltar and his cabinet, and Amy McNaughton, who's the WCA president, is here. And welcome again to everyone. We're so glad to see you. I'm delighted to kick off the Fall Weekend program today with a panel of distinguished Wells alumni. And they're discussing a very pressing issue of our time, which is environmental justice and climate change. And today's program is part of a wider set of initiatives the WCA is driving in support of the Wells Strategic Plan. And I want to recognize a few alums who are part of the career engagement team, which is also planning additional events later in the year to engage with students. And that's Sloan Bailey, Query Brooks, Carolyn Courtney, Sue Eskedal, Rachel Ristow, and especially Deb Callahan, who's going to be moderating today's panel. Deb is the CEO of the National Fenestration Council and an accomplished leader and speaker in the sustainability field. And in a minute, I'm going to hand it over to her. But first, a reminder for us all, and that's the Cayuga Land Acknowledgement, which was approved by the Wells faculty in May of 2018. Wells College recognizes our collective responsibility to acknowledge our colonial history. This land is the traditional land of the Cayuga Nation, a member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Wells College commits itself to ensuring the traditions and culture of Indigenous peoples are embraced and reflected upon in order to engage in solidarity with the Cayuga Nation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Deb Callahan. Take it away, Deb.
Great, thanks Chris for that introduction. Thanks everybody for being here today. And as noted, this is being recorded, so we're hoping that folks, will tune into this at another time, since we know that everybody's time is, we can't all be in two places at once. So we're hoping that students will actually listen to the recording of this at a later date, and we'll also find other venues for getting this information out to everybody. But again, my name is Deb Callahan. I'm the class of 85, member of the WCA board. I've been a class secretary for many years as well, and really an all-around cheerleader for this institution since day one. And on September 4th of this year, I actually celebrated two major milestones. The first was my 58th birthday, and then and it was also 40 years to my very first day at Wells College. My day one was my 18th birthday. And then I've been associated with this institution for 4 decades. It's a tremendous source of pride for me. This gem of an institution really means the world to me. And I wouldn't be where I am today without those critical 4 years that form my character, my intellect, and my unwavering can-do spirit. And that really factors into the topic that we're going to talk about today. So I've spent 30 years plus in the nonprofit industry. I've been fortunate to spend the last 16 of those years with the National Fenestration Rating Council as their COO and as their CEO. Better buildings, sustainability, energy efficiency, building occupancy, wellness, consumer advocacy, and education are all areas of personal and professional interest for me. And that's why I'm here with you today. You know, that we're living in challenging times with respect to our planet is indeed an understatement. And I see a lot of heads shaking right now. As a global community, we're in trouble as our appetite for consumption and subpar policies and practices have wreaked havoc on the planet. So these are challenging times indeed as we grapple with cause and effect. And the convergence of environmental issues and continued economic and social disparities only heightens the situation. And the cry for help is really a loud one. So I think really in reflecting on this and reflecting on this topic, we've got two ways in which we can deal with this. We can think that this is a crisis and there's no way out, or we can take the Wells way and see this as an opportunity to dig deep, to innovate, to affect change and to roll back some of the damage that's been done to our island home. So as Chris mentioned, today we're kicking off the first of what I'm hoping will be a mainstay in the WC's efforts to connect alumni with current Wells students, with the larger Wells community, and with other interested partners. We want to expose these topics to as many people as we can. So this is really in part tackling this topic, but it's also, this is an opportunity for us to form networks between alums and present day students. And everybody knows, regardless of whether you're a student or a professional at this point, that those networks are essential to all of us personally as well as professionally. And through our networks, we really inform each other, we share ideas, we establish long-term relationships as a result of those networks. Wells College is our common bond, and I promise you, and this is to the students, that it will sustain you now and throughout your life. So on with the show. Today's topic is vast, it's timely, and it's one that demands our attention, our innovation, and our problem-solving acumen. In this short hour, we're going to touch upon really a lot of areas here, such as green and sustainable buildings, climate change, its economic impact, renewable energy, and compromised communities. As Chris said, we've assembled a wonderful panel of Wells graduates to talk about their field of work, the roles that they've undertaken, what they're doing to help, and also how their Wells experience has informed where they are today. So I'm going to have each one of the panelists go ahead and introduce themselves to you. Then we're going to have a Q&A, and that's going to be followed by fielding questions that you should feel free to put in the chat. And we will take those as they come. And let's get on with the show. I'm going to have Rachel introduce herself, followed by Dimitri, Dana, and then Colin. And then we'll go to the Q&A.
Okay, thank you so much, Deb. I'm very excited to be here speaking with you all today. Wells always has a special place in my heart, and I owe so much to the college. So it's truly a privilege to be speaking here today. So as Deb said, I'm Rachel Partington, class of 2014, and I'm an environmental, land use, and municipal attorney with a boutique firm, Knauf, located in downtown Rochester. And I started my career in the environmental field working for the general counsel for the Onondaga Nation while he worked on the intervention of a natural gas pipeline construction project. And again, going back to Wells, they made that introduction for me, and it's changed my life forever. So very grateful there. I went on to study environmental and land use law at the Elizabeth Hobbs School of Law at Pace University, where I also worked as a land use consultant at the school's Land Use Law Center. After school, I returned to the Rochester area, my home, to work for my current firm, and a few of the highlights of my career so far have included working on a multi-million-dollar cleanup, a PCB cleanup in the Syracuse area. And this is done on behalf of Racer Trust, which is a trust that I represent along with my firm, created out of bankruptcy court for GM. And this case involves every major corporation you can think of in this space: GE, Bristol Myers Squibb, Carrier. It's a massive cleanup and ongoing, but I'm proud to be a part of it. And another highlight has included co-founding and representing Catskill Explorer, which is a nonprofit working to restore passenger rail service to the Western Catskills region and revitalize those communities. And currently I'm experiencing a new high, no pun intended, working on social equity, sustainability, and climate resiliency projects related to the newly legalized Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. So again, I'm so grateful to have the career that I have and to be speaking about it today. Environmental justice is very important to the work that I do, and so much of that was informed by my experience here at Wells. So thank you so much for having me.
All righty. Thank you, Rachel. Hi, my name is Dimitri Liapitch. I'm class of 2010. I went to Wells College for mathematical and physical sciences, concentrated in physics. And then afterward, I went to RIT for graduate school, which took me on a very long and interesting academic path. I went for sustainable engineering, and afterward came up with some cool sustainable technology ideas. So entered the Ph.D. program in sustainability. Turns out as a Ph.D. student, most oftentimes the university gets to keep your intellectual property. So I had to renavigate, got the second master's in sustainable systems from the Golisano Institute for Sustainability, and applied to the Tiger Tank, which is their local business competition, won first place. So got the scholarship in the MBA program. So after 9 years at RIT, ended up 3 master's degrees and a lot of knowledge on sustainability and sustainable technology, and definitely have to give credit to Wells College for preparing me for graduate school. The thesis was an excellent experience, as difficult as it was, but definitely formed the foundation of my academic career. And now I work for Larson Engineers in Rochester. We're a minority-owned business, which is a consulting engineering firm, working all across New York State, all things sustainability, work with businesses, municipalities, everything from renewable energy to cleanup. We're actually working on the lake water revitalization project on Onondaga Lake in Syracuse. So a lot of great opportunities, and I'm here to provide some support and see if we can continue networking, get some Wells people out in Rochester or all around New York State to do some more cool sustainability things. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Dimitri. I guess that means it's my turn to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Dana Grover. I am a very fresh recent graduate of Wells College, graduating in December of 2020. However, I still identify as an odd. I feel very lucky to have had the wonderful academic experience that I did at Wells. Within the first week on campus, I declared my major in sustainability, and I think that that is going to hold as one of the best decisions that I will make in my life. I think that the program, the sustainability program at Wells, is so well developed. And in my experience, I was learning from the very best of the faculty on campus. So I feel very grateful. The beginning of my experience at Wells was very kind of confusing, because sustainability is such a broad topic. It's such a broad field. There are so many different applications for the studies. And so first couple of years, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but with the help of Marion Brown, who I know is here today. Hello, Marion. I was connected with the Tompkins County Heat Smart program, doing community outreach, nonprofit community outreach for heat pump adoption in Tompkins and Chemung counties. And from that year-long internship experience, I was able to secure a full-time position, actually working and implementing the New York State Clean Heat program from the supply side. So my current role with ICF International is in contractor enrollment management for the Clean Heat program, as well as reporting on quality assurance and quality control measures to make sure that all of the technology that is being installed efficiently and correctly, and we make sure that buildings are having the technology necessary to downgrade their fossil fuel use. So I have not been working in this industry very long. It's been about 6 months, but I'm super excited to continue on my career path, and I would not feel so confident in doing so without the education that I got at Wells. So I just feel like a very lucky lady, and thank you for having me today.
Thanks, Dana. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name's Colin Evans, class of 2012, and I feel just like Dana does in that everything I have is thanks to Wells. I met my best friend, who I ended up marrying at Wells, and our daughter was born just 4 months ago, and her name is Aurora. So Wells means the world to me, and literally everything from my family to my education, my ongoing education, is thanks to Wells. So I received a master's. I was an environmental studies major at Wells. I went on to get my master's at the University of Massachusetts Lowell in atmospheric science in 2015, and in 2017 I started a PhD program at Cornell in atmospheric science, and my primary area of research and expertise is in drought and climate change in the Northeast United States. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone. I am so impressed right off the bat with this panel, and the more they talk, the more we learn, and that's what this is all about. So thanks again for being here. I just want to kick it off with a question for Rachel, and others can feel free to chime in on this as well. But I wanted you just to talk, Rachel, a little bit about the role of environmental justice in the green and healthy building movement.
Sure, that is a great question, Deb, and I love talking about it because environmental justice is increasingly being implemented in the green and healthy building movement. And when you're looking at its role, it's important to understand the history of it. So of course, the concept of environmental justice is that all people should share the environment's benefits and burdens equitably, right? So when you're examining this, it's important to look at the history of development in our country. And of course, I have to do it. I'm a history nerd. Shout out to Professor Cap and Professor Groth. But really, it's a movement that began in the early 80s and was rooted in the history of segregation and discriminatory development practices in the US. There's a really great podcast covering this history. The group is called Greenhouse SAS, and I encourage you to listen to it for a recap of this. But briefly now, a lot of this started when you look at even some of our major stimulus and infrastructure projects, and the New Deal, the GI Bill. It promoted growth in our country, but there were a lot of discriminatory practices in there. It included redlining, segregation through restrictive covenants, which essentially said in neighborhoods, they had agreements on property saying that this property could not be sold to African Americans or other people of color. And actually some of these covenants exist today, and we've had to do a lot of work to remove them. So that's the history we're looking at. And environmental justice really stemmed from not only that, but this unfortunate result that we saw from this, in that many times people of color and low income communities ended up in places with heavy environmental burdens. And so, they started seeing impacts from that. And that's where you get issues like Love Canal in Buffalo. You have heavy industrial sites along neighborhoods where people are living and eating, drinking water there. And we had horrific accounts of all types of, cancers and autoimmune conditions, chronic conditions, things that were killing people. And largely this was happening in communities of color and low income communities. So it's important to have that historical perspective when you're working in this space and looking at development moving forward. But, thankfully, federal government, state government, a lot of wonderful nonprofits have worked on developing tools to inform green building, sustainable development. And so they're also requiring this as part of project development. So if you're looking at EPA, they have a newly developed environmental justice map. So when you're looking at an area for proposed development, you can understand right off the bat what kind of environmental uses have been in the space historically. You can look at the different census data available to understand, what kind of demographics are you looking at in the community. You can look at what's the average salary. You can even look at information that's been done on health and people in the area, and to make sure that you're not contributing to that. It's really important. And there are a lot of other programs too. So EPA has the Brownfields Cleanup Program. And the goal of this is to take sites that have different levels of contamination and incentivize development and remediation of those spaces. So we see properties that were formerly having issues with PCBs or groundwater contamination, all kinds of environmental issues. And if a group goes and approaches EPA with plans to transform that space, they can receive grant funding and other types of support to remediate and redevelop. And it's a wonderful tool. And New York State has a similar program, the New York State Brownfield Cleanup Program, and this offers huge tax incentives to remediate spaces. So I've worked a lot in that program. And, there are a bunch of other ones too, opportunity zones, and environmental zones. All of this is grounded in the environmental justice movement. And, even as I mentioned, I've been working on the new cannabis law, and throughout it, there are a number of commitments to sustainable development and climate resiliency. In fact, when they're looking at applications for a new cannabis operation, whether they're looking at cultivation, even down to retail, they're going to now examine what's your ecological footprint in the space. They're going to see if people are utilizing renewable energy, all types of sustainability tools. So as I mentioned, increasingly, we're seeing more of this, and there are incentives for it. And also, for a lot of these programs, it's required that that's taken into consideration. And I'm so happy to see that. And, another highlight I had that I didn't mention earlier was working actually on a project for Alicia Keys and her husband. They were adamant about bringing young people out into nature and working on the arts. And so unfortunately, this project wasn't able to go anywhere because of COVID, but they were looking at a property that was a former research and development facility for Mobile Chemical. And it was a fantastic building in Macedon, actually my hometown. And they had plans for a performing arts center. They had plans for an art gallery that would be open to the public. And they wanted to provide classes to people. And so much of their planning was actually rooted in environmental justice. And on top of that, they were looking at, transforming a site with, a slight environmental history there, even though it's research and development, there's still some testing, still some concerns there. But again, we have all these programs to support remediation of properties like this. So I was so privileged to work on a project like that, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of that in the future. So there's the
Wow. Yeah, that's wonderful. And you know what, if you would, Rachel, at some point, just send an email with a lot of those things listed so that we can get them out to people. That would be really helpful. And I would say that of all speakers as we go through this, but what you're talking about is really intentional actions on the part of humans on this planet to try and hold back the forces of Mother Nature. So I want to just pivot a little bit to Colin, who is doing a lot of head shaking here. And Colin, if you could talk a little bit just about climate change in general, maybe give us a reality check, but also maybe some hope for the future that it's not going to get as bad as we think it's going to get.
Sure. Yes. So
if you can.
Yes, the reality is it's pretty bleak right now. I looked at the U.S. drought monitor this morning, and this is not an exaggeration. Literally half the United States right now is in some form of drought, with much of the West in the most severe category, which is called exceptional drought. Just this past August, for the first time in U.S. history, we issued a Western U.S. reservoir water shortage. So that's very concerning. I think many of us have probably seen the pictures of Lake Mead, which is behind the Hoover Dam. It's at like all-time lows. The wildfires each year continue to just seem to get worse and worse. We've had $18 billion weather disasters so far this year. with a couple months to go. So I'm sure we will probably have some more. So yeah, the reality is just, it's scary. And talking about especially environmental justice, um, something like 40% of the world's population live within like 100 kilometers of the coastline. So when we're talking about sea level rise and major hurricanes and things like that, those folks are going to have to go somewhere, and it's setting us up for some potentially trying times. We've already seen immigration on mass scales being difficult, and what to do with these evacuees and stuff. And so I once heard a talk from the chief scientist of the Jet Propulsion Lab, and they were estimating, if unchecked, we could be seeing something like 2 billion climate refugees by 2100. So like I said, it's bleak. However, what does give me hope is that we know what to do. We know what the solutions are. We've known for a long time that we just need to stop burning fossil fuels. And it's just, we need the collective willpower to do it. I've done the math, and every hour more solar energy hits the surface of the earth than the entire US uses in electricity in a year. So like, we have all the power we need. And yes, are there going to be cloudy days? Of course. Are the winds not going to blow sometimes? Absolutely. But we know how to work around that. Battery technology is ever advancing, and we know how to fix this. And it's right there. We just need somebody to really take on that leadership role for the globe to get us there. And the other thing that also really gives me hope is that younger generations certainly seem to really grasp the severity of the problem. So things like the Sunrise Movement, the climate strikes, the climate marches are all things that are like, okay, like, people are taking this seriously, and we have some time to avert the worst, scenarios of climate change. But we really do. We need to get going.
Sunrise Project, what is that? I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, so that is a youth-led movement on getting politicians, namely, to take climate change seriously.
Okay. Wonderful, thank you. Dana, I wanted to pivot to you. Colin's talking about alternative sources, and I know that this is an area that you have dug in deep over the last couple of months. So can you talk a little bit about the project that you're working on, and just clean heat, and also if you could talk a little bit about the distribution of that to lower income areas, and if you're seeing that there's if that's being done effectively.
Surely. So I want to touch on a couple points that Colin made.
Sure.
For a long time, for 50 years now, we have known about peak oil. We have known about many of the catastrophic effects of recklessly using fossil fuels, and we have not taken that seriously. And now we're in a time where the atmosphere is latent with CO2 emissions that we have, again, recklessly put out into the atmosphere. I think these days we're around 415 parts per million in the atmosphere. And to give you some reference, the optimal amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is around 300 to 350 parts per million. So we have, and I think in the early 2000s, it was talked about that if we were to surpass 400 parts per million, that would be catastrophic. And now we have. And what does not give me hope, right, is that people clearly need catastrophe in order to act, unfortunately. And we have surpassed the 400 mark with certainly some catastrophic events here and there, definitely more intense weather patterns, definitely hotter temperatures, and changing environments in some of our cities that make it unlivable for people consistently. And yet those catastrophes aren't big enough to get us to really act. And Colin, to your point about green technological advancement being very attainable and something that we need to put our metaphorical energy into, I suppose. You know, that is certainly true, but on a different level, I think it's really a lifestyle change that needs to happen. Fossil fuel use has been, even before 1970, baked into our economy. Our economic systems are dependent on fossil fuels, and fossil fuels are dependent on economic decision-making. So I think that leads into your question, Deb, about how low to moderate income folks are maybe inequitably reaping the benefits from some of the technologies that we have been deploying, such as heat pumps. Heat pumps are the love of my life, perhaps. I mean, they're so wonderful. They completely abolish on-site fossil fuel combustion, using latent energy from the sun in the air, heat energy from the sun in the air, to move heat in and out of buildings, into buildings in the wintertime, out of buildings in the summertime, to keep spaces conditioned in a comfortable fashion throughout the year. There are also, of course, geothermal heat pumps that work underground. They're a little bit more efficient. And we, not so much across the country, certainly in New York State, have really put a focus on the deployment of heat pumps in buildings, more so in residential buildings than in commercial and industrial. But that's the program that I have been working on for the past 6 months, is the New York State Clean Heat Program, which has been funded by NYSERDA since, I think, 2019, late 2019, early 2019, perhaps. And what that program is set out to do is incentivize HVAC contractors to begin really pushing and pushing for getting certified. Did I lose you for a second? Looked like I lost you for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So it's incentivizing HVAC contractors to really focus more on non-fossil fuel technologies. And the state and the utilities, Con Edison, Avangrid, National Grid, et cetera, give rebate money to these contractors and to the customers, the homeowners or tenants, which, to your point about low to moderate income folks, is it can be wonderful, especially when the state pushes for pilot programming that makes those systems completely free to customers. They can be very beneficial and completely accessible for low to moderate income folks. The hindrances that we see there are that it's much easier policy-wise and outreach-wise to do outreach towards homeowners rather than tenants of buildings, because the tenants don't have the decision power over the change of infrastructure of their whole building to be able to make those decisions for a specific unit. And I think we know a lot of low to moderate income folks don't own their own property. So it can be a real challenge to get them involved in that way. And, you know, another issue outside of the pilot programming is that heat pumps do come at somewhat of a high upfront cost. Of course, they completely eliminate fossil fuel bills, natural gas bills, propane bills, etc. But those savings are payback savings that take quite a while to realize, up to a decade to realize. So it can be very difficult to even convince low to moderate income residents that this is really a good long-term decision. And I think long-term is a really good keyword to use in thinking about climate change and thinking about how we need to switch policymaking and decision-making, because it all has to be very forward-thinking, very far into the future. Are we going to have to set our goals? And it's, I think, kind of against human nature to say, I'm going to take this action and potentially not even see benefit in my lifetime. And that's another reason why we kind of find ourselves in the place we are today, I think, is because there's been quite a sense of hopelessness, especially when the technology was not so accessible and developed and affordable as it can be today. So I do think we're moving in the right direction. I think that New York State is doing a very good job at trying to ensure that as many buildings as possible eradicate fossil fuel combustion on site. When you're eradicating on-site fossil fuel combustion, you're relying on the electric grid. And if every building is relying on the electric grid for their energy, for their conditioning energy, as well as their lighting energy, et cetera, and then you work to transition the grid away from fossil fuels towards working off of renewables, then buildings will automatically be net zero once that transition is moved along. And building energy use is a lot. It's, if you think about the energy use of all of the things we do that use energy, cars, buildings, industry, etc. Building conditioning it accounts for 50 to 70% of our energy use.
Wow.
And so, yeah, that's why it's a priority for me. That's why it's my focus. It seems like a very good first step to take. And so my hope is that some more states across the country are going to be realizing the benefits of these technologies and pushing for them. And also pushing for grid modernization and grid modernization towards renewable baselines. So
amazing.
There you go.
So much to unpack from that, Dana. That's really amazing, and you teed it up nicely to pitch some questions Dimitri's way with respect to sustainable buildings. And there were two things that you said, Dana. One is that people need a catastrophic catastrophe to act. And then, talking about what's happening with moderate and lower income housing, which so often they're not homeowners. So it's incumbent upon building managers and building owners to do the right thing. So Dmitry, can you talk a little bit about sustainable building? And, I first and foremost, I think about a place like Surf City, and we all watched in horror with the collapse of that condo. And, afterwards hearing about perhaps there not being the code compliance and enforcement that there should have been in that instance, which I'm sure Rachel can talk about, pending lawsuits with all of that, and we'll get to that. But Dmitry, how do we as a country reconcile this idea of sustainable buildings with our appetite for high aesthetics and for bucking nature and building where we shouldn't build and that sort of thing? And talk a little bit about your work and what you see happening there, Dmitry.
Sure. Yes, I mean, it is absolutely a difficult issue to tackle. We approach it, you have to kind of approach it from all sides. There's a top-down approach and the bottom-up approach top down being you have to make sure that the policy in place, the contractors are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and the bottom up approach being that the residents need to be conscious of their energy habits and their waste habits as well. And so my mother lives in Miami, and so this is something I talked with her and family about, what's going to happen when sea levels rise, we're going to have to relocate. And so there's kind of this balance between climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So you have to make sure that you can adapt to the changes of the warming planet and all the different effects from climate change, but also consider how can you slow that path down. So there's lots of different ways from, minimizing your energy usage or subscribing to a sustainable, clean, renewable energy procurement program. There's a CCA programs, which are allow the entire municipality to just subscribe to clean energy. Then there's Brighton, for example, and Rochester actually just recently signed over to CCA. So it's kind of you have the life cycle assessment side of buildings. So where are your materials coming from, and how are you processing those materials? How are you using them on site? And then where are they coming from? Are you transporting them from across the world, or are they locally sourced materials? And then after construction, what do you actually do with all the waste? So Larson Engineers does a lot of different types of projects as far as construction goes. Personally, as project manager in sustainability related projects, we look for how can we build solar systems for low income communities. And Rachel mentioned the maps that were available, and it's kind of amazing how many brownfields and contaminated sites there really are, even just in the Rochester area, and how many people live in those areas. And so in making sure that your buildings are, you said aesthetics, right? So beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? I think that is very possible, and lots of examples with LEED certified buildings, for example. RIT has the Golisano Institute for Sustainability, which is LEED Platinum building, has a lot of really cool technologies and a lot of different cool materials that went into making those buildings more efficient and less wasteful and also aesthetically pleasing. Then on the other side of the high-tech building, there's also low-tech passive housing. There's earth ships, a lot of cool designs of earth ships where you can use local materials to build. It's not like a spaceship, it's an earth ship, although most of them are stationary, so I'm not really sure why they're ships, but I digress. I think there's a lot of really creative ways that you can approach sustainability, whether that's through technology or through the lack of technology. Sometimes the easiest thing to do to get rid of your waste is just compost it. You don't have to, go through a multi-million-dollar waste management system to get there. So part of what I do is try to figure out what is actually the best way to implement different technology, because sustainability is the balance between your environmental, your social, and financial. So no matter how environmentally pleasing or socially sustainable might be, if it's too expensive, it's not going to work. If it's a great environmentally friendly building, but it's it's actually really cheap, but you're using, slavery to build it, that's not sustainable. And then the third way is if you have, no environmental benefits from it, then it fails kind of rule number one of environmental sustainability. So there's a lot of great opportunity. I'm really excited to see that there's this next generation of people who are really passionate about this, and everywhere from artists to engineers that are approaching different solutions for sustainability. So really excited to be part of it. Thankful for Wells College. Got to give a shout out to Niam O'Leary, professor in environmental science, who actually I credit a lot towards, motivating me to go into sustainability as compared to other things that a physicist might. So thank you.
Thanks,
Hope
Dimitri.
that answers the question.
It does, absolutely. And I wanted to ask Rachel just a little bit about, policy and related to this. And, there are, so again, very well intentioned at local level. And, so much that's happening in so many different groups that are popping up. I mean, if we count up the number of groups and initiatives that you guys have listed today, we're already, almost 20 plus. So Rachel, in terms of affecting change from a legal perspective, what's the number one thing that really has to be done here for us as a country to take this seriously, to make sure that we are making the appropriate changes that are going to secure the future generation? That might be a loaded question, but I think it looks like you're prepared to answer it. So go for it.
I'm ready, Deb. Yes, so the number one way to fight this is finding out what works best for you and what laws and tools do you have available. So as you know, there isn't one solution that's going to work for everyone. We all need to play our part. And as Dimitri mentioned, we have top-down approaches, we have bottom-up approaches. So focusing first at the federal level, I'm going to do that first because there's a lot of discouragement there. So we'll get that out of the way first, but then also focus on the local level. And it's not bleak completely bleak in either area, but we are facing a huge issue right now at the federal level because during the Trump administration, we saw a huge rollback of around 100 important environmental laws and rules. It just completely gutted. So we're now doing the work to restore what we had in place, a lot of laws that were passed with the birth of the environmental movement in this country, protecting clean water, clean air. We're doing what we can, but it's difficult. We're limited, and it's difficult to pass laws and maintain them in general in this country at the federal level. That means that we need to work with Congress. And how do we do that when we're heavily divided? There is a lot of work being done at this space, but it can be discouraging. I know that, for example, for federal infrastructure projects, we have NEPA, and that law allows for extensive review of the environmental impacts on projects. And I use this example because this was something that was heavily gutted during the Trump administration. And now we just had an announcement a couple of days ago. Thankfully, the Biden administration is working to restore that, because the parts that were gutted in this law allowed for public meetings and participation and further scientific investigation into the environmental impacts on projects. And it was couched as something that was an update that would allow for advanced permitting and would streamline the process. But really, what that means is that projects could move along without critical oversight. And that oversight was important to protecting the long-term ability of our infrastructure projects to actually make an impact in this country. And so I am happy to see efforts being made at the federal level to restore what we had in place and to build upon that. But I'm also very, very encouraged by what I'm seeing at the local level. And this is something where I really encourage people to get involved, because when you're looking from the local standpoint, what kind of liability is there? So any law that, I'm a municipal attorney, so I work on these laws, and any law that's passed has to be reasonably related to the general welfare of the public. So be aware of the types of laws that are being passed in your municipality, in your city, village, town, wherever you're at. And if you see an issue there, you might want to challenge that. If you see something that isn't promoting the general welfare of the public related to environmental justice, climate resiliency, sustainability, take up a challenge on that. Go to a public meeting, go to your town board meetings and voice your opinions on that. It's really critical. And I'm also encouraged by the fact that as a municipality, you have home rule in a lot of respects. So if there is an existing, we're in a state, we have a federalism system. So we have to be cautious of what laws are in place at the federal level, at the state level. But there are areas where municipalities can enforce their own laws. And a huge example we see with this was with fracking. And, you know, in the town of Dryden, that was one of the first principal cases where a municipality challenged fracking being done in their community and passed a moratorium. And, you know, at the time, it wasn't clear yet if they were able to do that, if they could ban a practice like that outright, but it was taken up by the courts and upheld. And that set the precedent for every community after that, showing that they could have a moratorium, a ban on certain types of fossil fuel practices. So, you know, like I said, it can get discouraging at the federal level. There are so many different parties involved, but there are really important ways that you can do this at the local level. And a really good resource on that is a book called Standing Ground, and it's using local law to protect your environment, written by John Nolan, who was my professor and I worked for at the Land Use Law Center. And it really changed my approach to the environmental work that I was doing, because at the time, you know, I was looking at working in DC, working in New York City. And when I saw incredible work being done in the local space, I decided that that's where I wanted to work. And so, like I said, you know, top down, bottom up, there are different ways to do it, but find what works for you. Find a community that's going to support you in the work that you do. And, you know, I'm always happy to talk with people to come up with ideas for how they can create change. And something people should be mindful of is that in New York State, we recently passed the New York Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And this has some of the most stringent goals on sustainability in the country. It features things like a goal for 70% renewable energy by 2030, 100% zero emission electricity by 2040. And so when you're looking at projects that you want to work on in your community, look at the state law as a guide, and you will be able to gain more support if your projects and initiatives are in line with this. I mean, these goalposts are coming up very quickly, and we need to get more aggressive about that in New York State. So again, there are a lot of different ways that you can have accountability. You know, another thing that I want to mention that was very new, we recently had the case Juliana versus the United States, and this was a case where 21 young Americans sued based on a violation of their constitutional rights by they sued the US government for taking actions that exacerbated climate change. Now, unfortunately, that case was dismissed because there was an issue of standing and whether they could actually prove those impacts now. But, you know, I think we could potentially see more cases like this in the future. And this case, Juliana versus the US, was modeled after another successful case actually in the Philippines that was led by a brilliant attorney who I was so fortunate to work under, Antonio Pozza. And he established through this case, which is very similar, it had to do mostly with the logging industry in the Philippines, and it established this principle of intergenerational responsibility, and that by heavily logging in the area, he's also worked on other issues overfishing. You know, these practices created costs for younger generations. And so, you know, even though we saw the similar case in our country thrown out, since they've spoke to these future impacts, and when they start really occurring and causing devastation, then I think we can take up the case again. So there are a lot of tools out there that we can work on.
Wow. Absolutely amazing. Thank you, Rachel, for all of that. And that is a session unto itself. And I know that you've spoken at Wells in the, and no doubt it's, you know, you need to take up the banner again and to continue to impart all of this really is just fascinating, precedent setting. And it does from a legal perspective, provide hope that we can make this, impact change. Rhea has a question for us, and I'm going to kick this out to the whole group because I don't know if anybody knows anything about this, but Rhea was interested in knowing about any progress being made with the infrastructure needed to encourage and allow widespread use of electric vehicles. Anybody on the panel know about that? I certainly don't. Throw it open to you guys.
Yeah, so I know that there has been funding available for electric vehicle station installations. I believe a lot of it, at least from what we worked at Larson, has been for commercial locations. With the new infrastructure bill being renewed, it's anticipated that there will be more funding available to pursue that. So the charging stations are becoming more necessary, but also more affordable in their scaling. So yeah, look, keep your eyes open for that, and hopefully it'll, we'll have a clean, renewable electric vehicle infrastructure developed in no time.
And there's a great program in New York State, NYSERDA, and I know that they have offered funding to municipalities to build charging stations and to purchase their own electric vehicles. So that's something that's an incentive right now, but with the New York State Climate and Community Protection Act, it's something that might actually be legislated in the future.
I don't know much about the progress that has actually been made, but I do think that, in any incentives that are available now or made available in the future, it's probably going to be more worth our while to incentivize commercial deployment rather than residential deployment of charging stations. And I know that there are a couple of gas station chains in New York State who are setting goals for themselves in the next, I want to say 5 years to incorporate a good number of charging stations for electric vehicles at every one of their locations. So that's kind of, corporations taking a little bit of responsibility for this. I also think that's just a smart business move, considering that we're moving away from gasoline in general. And so that those are a couple good points of progress that I hope continue.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I was just, for the purposes of all of us, just taking a look, and we're looking at by 2030 to hopefully have about 24% of our car sales be electric vehicles. And there have been a number of state governments, along with DC government, who have signed initiatives for electric cars and to have those in place by 2030. So making some movement there, and I'm sure more to come on that.
Deb, I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm just curious. Do you know if that 24% is a deployment of strictly electric vehicles, or does that include hybrid vehicles as well?
This stat does not. Yeah, it doesn't say. Yeah,
I'll have to look into that.
Yes, for sure, for sure. I wanted to see if there were any other questions as our time draws to a close here.
I just want to, sorry to interrupt also, I did just want to kind of hammer the point that if you're interested in getting an electric vehicle charging station, go to your business, but also go to the town meetings. The municipalities do provide surprisingly more support than you think, and they have funding available and there are incentives to do it. So even if your company that you work for is not in the position to be able to install these systems, talk to your local municipality and might be able to help out.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dimitri. Kay's got a question for us, and if we can unmute Kay. Are we able to do that, Rachel? Yep.
Okay, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I've been listening to your discussion and it's been informative, but I guess part of my frustration is we're not going to the grassroots at the bottom. In order to make some sustainable change, we need to change building codes. A simple one is roofing. I mean, you know, we have the technology. Solar power is actually cheaper than fossil power today. We have to do a new roof on a house at some point in time. If we use a transition plan, like how we went from analog to digital TV, say a 10-year transition, all new homes need to have solar installed. All new roofs at the time of replacement need to have solar installed. Now we get to the possibility of a distributed energy, which will enable us to get from where we're sucking up fossil fuel to having a real change. Everybody's going to scream the cost, but it always costs. It's immaterial, the cost. You really just have to sit and look at the numbers. Now, I put in a geothermal system 6 years ago, and I put in a solar panel system 3 years ago. So between the two, my electric bill is down to 70, 80% of what it used to be, because I coupled that with insulation and stuff. The thing is, Americans are not going to give up their lifestyle. They're not going to compost. We don't want to do that. What you need to do is incorporate the ability to sustainability and keep your lifestyle. That's how you're going to change it. And you need to educate people and stop making it a political issue. This is crap. We need to get there. And it's frustrating. The biggest part about it is you go to a builder, you go to the guy, oh, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. Do you know how hard it was for me to get my geothermal system put in? I went through 4 sets of people and oh, we can't do it because they want to do a lateral system, which is easier in new construction and not a vertical system. I finally found somebody who could do it because I knew it was doable. But they discourage people from going there because they want to sell you a traditional system. We need to change those guys because those are the first people the consumer sees. You know, it's all good and well doing all this stuff at the top end, but if I'm the guy just needs a new cooling system or heating system and he's telling me he can't do it, then we've gone back into another system they're going to have for 20 years.
Right,
So
right.
that's my
Yeah.
personal frustration.
Yeah, and you know, Kay, thanks for that. And that is something that probably everyone on this panel, everyone on this call is frustrated with. Code enforcement in the United States has considerable challenges. Even in the work that I do in the fenestration industry, window, doors, and skylights, there is limited code enforcement when it comes to products in commercial buildings. And we know the commercial buildings in the United States consume 40% of the energy in the US, and yet there are not strict code enforcement with respect to building materials, fenestration products, all of those other things within a commercial building. We know that, you know, all of this is multi-layered at a state, local, you know, federal level, that, you know, in a free market, there are challenges, there are workarounds for building owners and building officials, and it's very frustrating. And yeah, I think that, you know, there is that cry, and I think that there are a lot of people, so many people who are committed to this at a grassroots level. And that's a way that we can really get things done. It is incumbent upon individuals to do the right thing, but we also know that in doing the right thing is often costly. When we talk about the idea of you know, environmental justice and affordability, as Dana was saying, you know, it's costly to put a heat pump in your home. Until that is better regulated, then lower income folks aren't going to be able to lower income communities aren't going to be able to do that. It's the same thing with, you know, higher tech roofing materials, cool roofing materials, those sorts of things. They're costly, and that's a component of this that's got to be tackled as well. So it's a multi-layered. I hear your frustration. I think everybody here, you wouldn't be on this call if this wasn't something you were interested in and concerned about. You know, we've got to find you know, a better way of depoliticizing it. And, you know, the hand is being forced here. Colin talked about the environment and what's happening and climate change. And this stuff is real. And we've got to get beyond the politics, and we've got to do better in terms of enforcement, regardless of what side of the aisle you're sitting on. So,
well, the thing is, you know, I'm concerned about the definition of low income, because I think the median income in the United States is $60,000 a year or thereabouts.
Mhm.
So that means, I don't know what definition of low income is, but if you have a home, I guess my problem is when you classify it as low income, you've automatically turned off a whole bunch of people who are not going to be interested in making a change because it's us and them and it's their problem.
Mhm.
But it's actually the majority of our problem, you know? And if you own a house, I don't care what your income is, you know, there needs to be something. But at the end of the day, we're running out of power. We can't rebuild the grids as they stand today. And I see distributed power as what happened when Ma Bell went from, you know, a massive behemoth of a phone company to cell phones. It was all the gnashing of teeth and woe's me, you're putting me out of business. Those companies are making more money today than they ever dreamed of making 30 years ago. It's just the inability to see change as a good thing. Disruptors are hard, but we have to get there because, you know, sure, we're running out of water, but when we start running out of power, and the economic impact of that is going to be devastating, you know, and that's what nobody seems to want to look at. It's not 10 years down the road. It's maybe one power outage that dominoes into a third of the Northeast region.
Yeah, you're right. No, we are here now. And Dana so eloquently said that earlier today about, you know, people needing a catastrophe to act. And we do that. We do that, yet we have a selective amnesia and it's easy to forget about it. And then the next thing happens and we're all up in arms. So, you know, banding together, getting involved is going to be really, really key here. So thank you, Kay, for that. And again, that's a discussion for us to continue. I know
just
that
quickly, if I could, I just
Sure,
wanted to
please.
say in navigating through some of the companies, often I recommend consulting with an engineering firm because they take away the bias from a company trying to sell you their product the way they want to. So if you're a business or a resident, it's always worth consulting with an independent consulting firm.
And I did that. Thank you.
That's great, Dimitri. Thank you very much. And, you know, just building off of that, and I just wanted to give each speaker just a brief minute, if you could limit it to that, to the final question. And this is just a Yay Wells question, but, you know, Henry Wells's legacy is really that it prepares graduates to think critically, reason wisely, and ultimately to act humanely. So in the context of our discussion today, I'd like each of you just to talk about that, talk about it in your work, and let's then just end the session with those parting remarks. And we can go in reverse order then as from when we started. So I believe Colin, you're up. Dana,
Sure.
Dimitri, and then Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, as I think this panel has demonstrated, these are very complicated discussions, and they're going to be very complicated solutions and implementations. And so, you know, the Wells philosophy of thinking critically and reasoning wisely is like exactly what we need. And personally, Wells has prepared me so well to do that. I've spoken to many alums who have said that master's programs were not nearly as difficult as they were made out to be because Wells prepared us so well. And I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give, and I'll wrap up real quick, is just to talk about climate change. Talk about it with people. The more people that are talking about it, the more it's going to be in our collective conscience to act on it.
Thank you.
All right, I'll keep this brief. So to talk to thinking critically, right? We're in a critical time for decision making right now. We have been in a critical time for decision making for quite a while. And the fact that I don't think we have been as focused and progressive in individually and as communities, as one whole government, really tackling the issues that we've been seeing. You know, it is it is vital for us to be really thinking critically right now about where we are and where we need to be. No action can be taken unless we really understand what is needed for the future, and put aside any kind of personal bias towards, only wanting to take action if we can personally reap the benefits from that, because it just, not everybody is going to be able to do that if everybody is going to be participating here. A point about reasoning wisely. I think it is certainly possible to reason wisely using the past, using history, using what we know and what we've seen, and projecting into the future. But that projection into the future is really where wisdom is born. And so again, we need to not only look back into the past and say, and look at what has worked and what hasn't worked, and make decisions from there, but look into the future, forecast into the future, what life might look like should we continue with our lifestyles. I know it's been said on this call, people want to live sustainably, but they don't want to give up their current comforts and current lifestyles. And unfortunately, that's what's going to have to happen. And I think that will happen if people are reasoning wisely and saying, if we continue this way, then my children, my grandchildren, myself will experience a situation in which we don't have the decision anymore to make. We can't decide to stop using fossil fuels. We will have to stop using fossil fuels and have no backup, no net, no real preparation to do that. And then acting humanely. I think in order to act humanely, we need to act with everybody in mind. And a lot of the current paradigm in the United States is a very individualistic one. And so, that's another point about the lifestyle change, and also points to really getting involved in local efforts, because that is where you're going to see the most accessible community engagement, as well as feeling the effects on a smaller level, but feeling actual effects in your own community, of actions and decisions that you make towards what is hopefully going to be a better future.
Thank you, Dana.
Yeah, so for me, I think Wells has definitely encouraged critical thinking. I'm going to kind of tell us maybe a little silly story, but it did encourage the path that I'm on today. There's so many wonderful things about Wells College. There's the beauty, there's the academia. For me, it was the ability to feel like I could ask questions, and those questions weren't immediately thrown away or discarded. It was allow me to really develop that critical thinking. And so one day I was on the Wells dock, and I'm fishing and looking at the beauty, and all of a sudden there's what some might call this wind of the smelly smell of wells, which ends up being, when the farms around Wells College end up fertilizing, there's a lot of methane emissions that come out. And so it made me wonder, what can I do to be able to make wells even better? Well, this isn't even something that's related to them, but it's affecting them. Right? It's changing the social side of it, because you go and visit Wells College, and all of a sudden you get this delightful breeze, and it makes you think twice about everything, depending on where you are and who you are. So for me, it was the ability to think, all right, well, where's the smell coming from? What is it? How can we change it? Oh, it has methane emissions from all the agriculture. Okay, well, how can we mitigate that? What can we do to be able to reduce the overall atmospheric impacts? And so that led me down the path of discovery in sustainability and sustainable engineering. The idea is that we should be designing and engineering things without having people reduce their quality of living or changing the way they do things through design and engineering. And so it's just interesting to think back, where I was then and where I am now, and really how many little things did actually influence my path. And I definitely give credit to Wells College for providing the environment and atmosphere for me to be able to explore that and pursue graduate school way further than I ever expected I would. So thank you, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Dimitri. And Rachel, take us home. You've got a minute.
All right. So Dimitri, that was a good story because I actually remember being a student and you were so serious about sustainability. I was like, yeah, it was infectious. I wanted to get involved. So I loved hearing that and how it impacted you. And there was a class I took at Wells, shout out to Professor Morphy, is the psychology of sustainability. So we talked about consensus building. That's what we really need to focus on. We need to identify what are the differences that we have, but what are the things that unite us. And this wasn't planned when you brought this up. I just grabbed the book. I still have it, EcoMind. That was one of the main ones we had. The urban design handbook, all of these things, they're still with me today. I read them frequently. And so, look at your local laws, look at how you can push enforcement of them and how you can amend them. Look to what the city of Austin is doing to update their comprehensive plan and laws to phase out fossil fuels. We have so many tools, as I mentioned, and we need to learn how to build a consensus and work together.
Wonderful. Great closing remarks from everybody. And we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our participants. I want to thank Chris Gordon for spearheading this effort, Marion Brown for all of your help with this initiative. And also shout out to my NFRC colleague, Tom Herron, who gave freely of his time to help shape this presentation, this session. Thank you so much for that, Tom. So obviously the conversation's just getting started. We covered a lot and we'll start to narrow it as we progress here with future conversations at Wells. So I think that's it for now. I don't know, Chris or Rachel, if there's anything else that we need to say before we sign off and let everyone get on with their day into the next session, actually.
Yeah, the next session's at 1 o'clock, a meet and greet with our advancement team. We've got some new members. And then this afternoon, we'll have our video launch of the Young Alumni Award for Outstanding Achievement. And it will highlight this year's recipients and honor last year's. And thank you so much. I'm really
Thanks,
grateful.
everybody.
Yep. Well
Thanks
done.
for coming.
Thank you very much, everyone.
See you again soon. Thank
Have
you.
a good day.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.